So in this video, I want to explore a question: why the mind wants to control others, why the mind cares what other people do, why the mind tries to control the objects and situations around it. And the short version is that the mind has discovered that it cannot control itself. And as a substitution, what the mind will gravitate towards is controlling other minds and controlling the people around it, controlling the objects around it. And that's sort of a substitute for what it really craves. And that is something it can never have, and that is the control of itself. And that may be something that people learn early on in yoga, in martial arts, in meditation. When you start meditating, you very early on, you may learn that the more you try to control your mind, the more it backfires. So you say, well, don't think of the number 13, and that's all you can think of. And I think one of Alan Watts' best lectures is Mind Over Mind, and he really gets at this paradox of the mind trying to control itself. And so how do we get into this? Like, how did we get into this situation in the first place? I mean, if the mind absolutely cannot control itself, why did we buy into this idea in the first place? Well, it's because the mind gives us this illusion of cooperation. And so if you're doing the right type of task, if you're doing something like I say, well, count to 10 in your head, and the mind will think 1, 2, and it will count, and it seems so cooperative. And in fact, there's so many times in life, if as long as the task is simple and pretty straightforward with no risk involved, the mind will have no problem cooperating with itself. And in those cases, it gives us the illusion that it is the mind that is in control of mind. The problem is that there are also so many times when the exact opposite seems to happen. As I said, don't think of the number 13, or you have to get up early tomorrow, so you need to get to sleep, and the mind races more the more you try to quiet it. And those are really helpful because those are the hints that the mind cannot control the mind. You're trying to give a speech, and you desperately want to be calm and collected, and yet the mind becomes scattered and anxious. Because the mind cannot control the mind, one or two things can happen from this. The wonderful story is enlightenment, when people realize that they are not this program. On the other hand, one of the more common things throughout human history is when the mind recognizes it has no ability to control itself, it gravitates again towards controlling others. And if you want to summarize almost the entire field of psychology, so if you take an intro to psych class, talk about conformity, you can talk about obedience, you could talk about whether it's Zimbardo's prison study, Milgram's study, or Asher's conformity studies, human beings seem to be so susceptible to the control of others, and at the same time, so seductive is it for us to control other minds that, that's what we call craving power. That's what true power is as far as the mind is concerned, the ability to control what other people think. And so one of the things, maybe the main message of my channel, if I have any kind of coherency to anything in my life, is helping people recognize that they are not the mind. So what this can do is this can be very helpful for us, because when your mind wants to control others, which is exactly what it wants to do, it can be a pointer that this isn't who you truly are. And so really, as a form of meditation, be observant of when your mind wants to control other people, when the mind wants to control other situations. Now, sometimes these can be really obvious and maybe even helpful to the survival of this meat suit, which is, of course, one of the basic functions of the mind. And what I mean by this is if your neighbor wants to explore, nuclear weapons or something, in experiments, it seems pretty obvious you may want to control that behavior because it has such an obvious effect on you, or at least potentially. And that's probably the kind of situation that the mind evolved in the first place. But what I'm getting at in terms of a form of meditation is when your mind wants to control others, when there's absolutely no reason for it. And so, if someone is standing a little bit further back than they should in line, and you could see the mind, it will be like, conform, why aren't, well, what do I need to do? Just get in line. Same thing with Carlin had a great piece about this in his comedy where he would talk about, there's two types of drivers out there. There's maniacs and then people who are just too slow. And because again, the mind really wants to control others to go what we consider to be the perfect speed. And so if you're out driving and you can see and you can feel the mind like, why aren't you going faster? Well, again, that's the mind, which is unable to control itself, extending out into the world, trying to control others. And when you recognize, again, that it's hopelessly devoted to controlling everything it can, and it can't control itself, so it's going to go out to the next best thing, which is other minds, I think it could be a helpful pointer, but that's not you. And it's just this old program uh, in the skull that we simply do not need any longer.